Hello and welcome back to 209 Prep Sports Media. Back in the studio with Scott Bryant and myself, Chris Herrera. We're into, some schools are into week 3 of the football season. Most schools are into week 2 of the football season. We'll spend today recapping the games from last week. We called it early and often that the Oakdale-Escalon game was going to be the game of the week, and I don't think it disappointed. We'll go over those scores a little bit later, as well as some of the stats. This isn't coming easily. Many schools, especially in the Sacramento area, had to cancel their games this last week, and then I know there's been some schools in the San Joaquin County that have had to cancel for some positive COVID tests and things like that. But more or less, things are happening. Games are getting played relatively safely. Obviously there's a lot of parameters. People are having to skip, having, fans in the stands. Some schools have allowed, a parent or two plus immediate family. Some are just one parent. Some, so it's hit and miss how it goes. Luckily the CDPH or CDHP, whatever the acronym is, reversed their initial decision to not have any cheer allowed at the schools, at the sporting events, and they've kind of reversed path on that, and now are allowing cheerleaders to attend games, which it's part of the ambiance, and obviously those the girls and boys in the cheer programs are working hard as well, so they should be able to go out and do what they do and live their lives just like the players are doing with multiple sports. So again, a lot of softball going on, a lot of baseball going on. I was informed that St. Mary's had a track meet yesterday with Lincoln. So I think that was the last track meet for them. So some of the tracks kind of winding down for the TCAL, but I think it's ramping up for the SJ2A and a lot of the other local schools, and as well as baseball and softball. Also basketball is starting now. I mean, we talked about it last week. This nightmare that these ADs are going through is I can't even imagine how you've got to be pulling your hair out at both ends. So
yeah, I don't envy the role that the athletic director has to play, because they're doing everything they can, I think, to really make these events possible. But then they're doing it with one hand tied behind their back, because our state, our county, they're just depending on where you're at, the rules that have been put into place can be very restrictive. And from an outsider looking in, I find it really difficult where you've got an outdoor event, say a football game, or for example, the Lodi Linden game this last week. I got a chance to watch it online. And when you look at the stadium, there's enough room in that stadium where you could have easily had, multiple people for each player sitting in the stands, maintaining social distance, and providing a really good atmosphere, not only for the players, but for the family members that want to see their kids play, because it's a whole lot different seeing something in person than it is, watching it online. But it's the hand we've been dealt. I don't know that most of the people that I speak to agree with some of the rules. I mean, we all agree that, we need to take measures to prevent the spread, but, at some point we also need to be smart about it.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's unfortunate, I think, for the families, and even just the casual fan, or not so casual fan, the people that have spent the last, we hear of a lot of people that will tell us, oh, I've not missed a home football game for 50 years, and for that's difficult as well, so especially for smaller communities in that Escalon-Oakdale matchup. Can you imagine in a non-COVID year if that game had actually happened, what the fans would have been like?
Yeah, I think that's one of those games where you play on a non-traditional day, so that even all the the teams that compete with Escalon and Oakdale, they can come watch the game. I guarantee you, and you look at the score, that game definitely lived up to the limited hype that it had because of where we are right now. But
sure.
But yeah, I can only imagine I wish I would have been able to see that game. I didn't get to see it, but I can only imagine, to your point, what the attendance would look like and, what the atmosphere would have been. It definitely would have been, Friday Night Lights, I guess, for lack of a better term, of what we've been hoping for. And quite honestly, it's my hope that becomes a regular scheduled game,
and it could
when we go back.
Yeah, I mean, we could start breaking some of the traditional norms that we've had in the past with, and some of it is, just probably by a little bit of stubbornness and a little bit of, there's not a lot of value to play certain games, for certain teams. But I think for those two teams, I think there's a ton of value because both of them are power ratings. It's not going to hurt you. So we're going to go ahead and get into the scores from last week. We had a huge week. I mean, I think there was, upwards of 30 plus games, just in our area. So let's start a rundown of those now. Scott will kind of cover those, and we'll kind of hit some highlights of statistics and who, kind of who had the better games there.
Yeah. So, I'll get started off. Here on a couple. Kind of, I guess, what would be described as a rivalry game now that these two schools are within proximity of each other, and they're both fairly new schools. But we had Mountain House played Lathrop. Final score: Mountain House 22, Lathrop 15. So I'm sure that was quite a game to see. Rolling down the highway, I'm going to throw a couple of scores out there that are not traditionally in the area that we serve, but only because I think some of the future games are gonna be against some of these schools. But looks like we had a baseball game between El Dorado and Laguna Creek. Final score 3-0, and then a game that we had talked about before, and talking about St. Mary's and the tough schedule that they have leading off with De La Salle in week 1. They played Jesuit in week 2, and not an easy task by any means, but they were victorious 43-20. And I don't know if you've got some input on that game. I know you got to see that game. So
yeah, it was a really, really well played game, both sides. Jesuit moved the ball pretty well with their passing game, couldn't run the ball particularly well. St. Mary's pretty much moved the ball at will, both running the ball. I know that Tyree Washington had a pretty good game running the ball. I don't know what his exact stats were, but it was a pretty impressive game for him. And then Nathan Arnado had a pretty good game passing the ball. He had a couple of touchdown passes, I believe, to Nas Danielson, and one was to Nick Murray. So it was a very, very well played game. Kids flying all over the field. Lots of big hits, and just a lot of good effort on both sides. I don't know the quarterback's name from Jesuit, but he had a pretty good game connecting with one of his receivers almost every time he threw it up there. The kid went up and got it. So it was pretty good, pretty well played game on a Saturday. The weather was perfect, and that was probably there's quite a few fans, so the environment was pretty good for that. So
yeah, and I want to backtrack just a sec back to that Mountain House Lathrop game. There was a pretty good performance there out of Brian Leslie Fitzpatrick. 13 carries, 90 yards, and three touchdowns. So he had a heck of a performance in that game for Mountain House. Again, the final score in that one, 22-15. We had, we talked about, briefly hit upon the Oakdale Escalon game, 38-35. If the score is anything like the game was played, my goodness, that would have been quite a sight to see. Definitely lived up to the hype, at least score-wise. And if anybody's got any input that was able to sneak in and see that game, or was a family member or something along those lines, and would love to hear from you on that one. Let's see here.
Well, I know in that game both quarterbacks had really big games, shockingly, because both of those offenses are known for their running game, and I think they ran the ball pretty well too. But both of them were near 300-yard passers with multiple touchdowns, I believe. So, and it was a high-scoring game for two strong defenses. So obviously the offenses came, and the offense I think is going to have a little bit of an advantage right now, with the defenses trying to play catch up with all the time off that we had.
Yeah, absolutely. We had in the Modesto area, we had series beating Grace Davis by a score of 34-32, another close contest. Sonora playing Gustine. So Sonora up in the mountains playing a West Side program. Again, Sonora's one of those schools that was in a higher division for an awfully long time and is now a kind of a staple in the Motherlode League. So it's still, for me, who, I've been following high school sports in this area for quite a long time, to see a Sonora Gustine, that one, I'm not used to seeing schools like that play each other. So Sonora ran away with it 33-7. And then Johansson, played Bayer. I guess, again, another game that you could classify as a rivalry game. And, Bayer in years past, if you rolled back, say 20 years ago, Bayer was just kind of another date on your schedule. But then they really, over the last, 20 years, that program's really improved, and they've put some really good football on the field. But it looks like they kind of tripped up and had a tough one with Johansson, losing by a score of 62-6. Kind of moving on, we've got kind of, again, a little south of our purview, but LeGrand beating Delhi 33-6. And then a score that I want to bring up again that's kind of outside of our area, but it's significant because this affects Linden in a couple of weeks. But Christian Brothers beat Sacramento High by a score of 42-0. And I know Sac High is on your schedule in a couple of weeks, so I'm sure that's another non-traditional matchup of Linden, playing a big school. So I'm sure the players at Linden are, eagerly awaiting to play that game. Then we had Grigori and Modesto. Final score: Grigori 54, Modesto 20. And then a game that I got to watch, Lodi and Linden. Final score was 30-14 with Lodi edging Linden. This was a tight game. At halftime, I think the halftime score was 16-14. After I know there were a lot of miscues in this game on both sides of the ball. It really, I think it boiled down to who could eliminate those the most. And obviously Lodi, being a bigger school, they had more depth. They had more people to go to. There were a lot of turnovers in this game. There, right before halftime, I think Linden and Lodi would have gone in tied at halftime, except for there was a safety on a missed snap there right towards the end of halftime. But to me, this is a very respectable score, going in and playing a big school like that. But I'll go ahead and, if you want to elaborate on a little bit more.
Yeah, we traveled 19 players to Lodi. They probably had close to 60, I would guess. And we lose one of our players first quarter to a leg injury, second player in the second quarter to an injury, third player and quarterback in the third quarter early to an injury. So we're effectively playing with 16 guys, and it's not like you get to pick and choose which 16 you have. So we were depleted at a couple of spots, but Lodi was sound. Again, a bunch of miscues. They put the ball on the turf quite a bit. I think that's where they'll have an opportunity to clean it up. But their running game was solid. They made a few key passes. But all in all, I thought it was a very well played game. Not a lot of penalties. Not a lot of issues that came about, and we got to play. I mean, that's at the end of the day, it's a game like we talked about. It's not a traditional game. Lodi, I think, has about 2,200 kids in the school. Linden has 600. So it's not typically a matchup that you would have, and in a typical season with Linden having maybe 30 players, maybe we're a little bit more competitive in that game. We gassed second quarter, really had the tough second half. So, but Lodi deserved the win. They were the better team.
Yeah, understandable. I do want to point out I think one of the players, highlighted players of the week in the area was James Sherman, senior from Linden. He had 15 carries for about 70 yards, caught 6 passes for 80 yards, and scored both touchdowns. And so that's a player to keep your eye on for upcoming games. And so he was really kind of a standout for you guys this last week.
Yes, sir.
Moving on, we had Oristemba playing Denair 49-6. Oristemba, Enoch's edging Pittman 30-24, which I haven't really followed those schools very closely in recent times, but Pittman's usually a very competitive program. So hats off to Enoch's for a good win for their program. Moving back north, Tokay against West. I gotta be honest with you. This score was maybe it's just because I don't understand the personnel on both sides from both teams, but 56-0 Tokay over West. I see Tokay definitely as an improved program. They've got a great new stadium over there. The coaching staff does a really good job. I anticipated a win by Tokay here, but that's a pretty big score. So Tokay, that's a big victory for them. Back down in down south, we had Turlock beating Downey 56-24. Pacheco beating Los Banos 16-13 in what appears to have been another very good game. Another score that I want to kind of talk about that's a little bit outside of our purview, but is probably along the lines of that Oakdale Escalon game. You had Granite Bay and Folsom. Folsom has been in the state conversation for the last few years. This is a school that 30 years ago was in probably the lowest division.
Yeah, we used to play them at Linden in playoffs.
I played Folsom in high school when I was at Linden, and that was always a tough game. But now they're, Granite Bay, they beat Granite Bay 35-25. And so I imagine, again, we're talking, looking at statistics and we're talking about scores and just kind of wishing we got to go to some of these. But that's another game that I would have loved to have seen. A Battle of Stockton teams, Stag beating McNair 43-13. And I just real quickly, Eric Hankins Jr., senior from Stag, he was 9 of 15, threw 2 touchdowns, and after the first week, he ranked 17th in the South King section in passing yards. So looks like Stag's got a pretty good quarterback there in Eric Hankins Jr. And then moving on to, let's see here, Weston Ranch played Sierra, and we've talked about the Sierra program. Sierra has been really, really effective in the last few years, and this last week was no different, beating Western Ranch 55-7. Let's see here. Moving on. Franklin High School and Bear Creek, a very evenly matched game. Franklin's got they've got a new coach there. Final score is 24-20. I imagine the game was really that close. Again, you've heard me talk about it in the past on this program, but I'm really excited for the future of Franklin, and not only Franklin football, but all their sports. They're getting some top-of-the-line facilities installed as we speak, and so it's really going to be interesting to see how that affects their performances on the field. So.
Yeah, I think that they're going to be in a good spot. Ralph King took over. Ralph King left the Stag program as a longtime assistant and is in charge of the Franklin program. Franklin's never had an issue with athletes. It's they've always had kind of downtrodden facilities, and so I think it's, like you said, I think you should get the kid that's kind of on the fence whether he wants to play or not, that maybe decides to play now because you're playing, in a program, and if Coach King brings over the offense that they're running at Stag's a systematic offense where they pass a lot for a good, they move the ball well and score a lot. And so, I think that's good. We had a Thursday game last week. Somerville played, Somerville ended up playing Big Valley Christian to a 16-14 game. I believe I was told by the referee in our game that he'd ref the game the night before, and it came down to a goal line stand at the end of the game, and Somerville was able to stall out the Big Valley Christian offense and ended up winning the game 16-14. So again, there were probably 5 or 6 phenomenal 2-point, 1-point type games or one score type games. For week 1, I think everybody would take that. I think talking about kind of the performers of the top top players at this point. Nick Coronado, I think you and I both agree, is probably one of our players of the week.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, Nick threw for 335 yards. He was 29 for 47 with 4 touchdowns and 2 picks. So Nick, as of right now, Nick's the top yardage passer in the area. Ty Harris, I mentioned already, he threw for 283. He was 17 for 23 for. It doesn't have him having a touchdown in the stats on Max Preps, but they do have him having a pick. And so, you know, we can only talk about what we have. Anthony Casillas at Orostemba was 8 for 10 for 234 and 3 touchdowns, no picks. Nathan Arenado's got 2 games under his belt. He's averaging 114 yards. He's 17 for 29 for 229. And then Bradley Kerno at Sonora was 10 for 14 for 227 and 3 touchdowns, no picks. Those are the top. Cruz Marinas had a pretty good week this week at Grigori. He was 6 for 12 for 198, 4 touchdowns and 1 pick, and I think he he rushed for over 100 yards as well. So those are the top passers for through. And it's hard for us to really know like how this is playing out, but through week 2, some teams already have 2 weeks under their belt, but some only have the one. The leading rusher, and again, we have to go by the information that we're being given, which is on Max Prep. So I know for a fact that Lincoln's stats are not in here. I know that Jonah Coleman had a phenomenal week, as well as Kenyon Nelson and Fidel Pitts. Their whole offense went off. They obliterated somebody. So, but their stats aren't in, so it's really hard for us to know what people did. The leading rusher in our area for the podcast that we're covering is Joe Filippini. So Joseph Filippini, he had 10 carries for 183 yards and 5 touchdowns. So
that's I don't care who you're playing. You get 5 touchdowns against anybody. That's a pretty impressive performance. And again, nothing against West, but I can see, kind of what you were alluding to a few minutes ago. I can see as we progress through this shortened season, by the time we get to games 4 and 5, I think you're going to see much more polished teams.
Yep.
And you're going to see kind of things even out a little bit. But man, when, I think the 2 players that we really, until we officially get to the point where we have players of the week, I really agree. Nicholas Coronado and Joseph Filippini are, on this podcast, we're going to highlight them as our players of the week.
Yeah.
They both had fantastic performances, and I'm sure this is not the last we're going to hear from these 2 guys, as well as there were some really, some other really good performances. I had mentioned Eric Hankins from senior from Stag. Noah Deneau, senior from Tracy, he had an outstanding game. Francisco Colon from Manteca. Let's see, he had a 21-yard score late in the game that really pushed Manteca over for the victory. He's definitely a player to keep your eye on. Joey Sanchez from Lathrop caught 3 passes for 50 yards. Mentioned James Sherman from Linden, and Naz Danielson from St. Mary's had an outstanding game against. Yeah,
Naz has had a really good season so far. Yeah. No. And then you have, kind of rounding out these top running backs, Khalid Robinson from Manteca had 19 carries for 178 yards and a score. Jonte Magard, or Magard maybe, a junior out of East Union, had 16 carries for 169 and 2 touchdowns. Tyree Washington's averaging about 90 or 85 yards a game or so. And then Gabe Benton over at Stag. Gabe rushed he had 24 carries for 158 yards, no touchdowns. And then Isaac Herman, the senior down at Grigori, had 9 carries for 159 and 2 touchdowns. So there were some pretty good weeks this week. On as far as passers and rushers, the top receivers going into week 2-ish or 3, depending on what school you're at. Gabe Milborn, tight end up at Sonora, had 205 yards receiving, 7 catches, 3 touchdowns. Pretty phenomenal for for a tight end.
Yeah.
And that offense is a run dominated offense.
That's right. Yeah.
Verlis Smith, wide receiver at Series, had 201, 7 catches for 201 and 2 touchdowns. And then you had Jaden Vargas, and I think Jaden has a brother that's pretty good too. But Jaden had 149 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. And then Jaden Marshall out of St. Mary's, he's averaging 72 yards a game, but I think he was just shy of 100 this week with a touchdown. And that's about it. Oh, then you have, I'll go ahead and, I'm going to blow this name up, but it's Asazi Azaway, maybe. 104 yards receiving on 7 catches, no touchdowns out of Kimball. So he was obviously one of Nick Coronado's targets this week.
Yeah, if you're a receiver in that program, you got to be excited to play, knowing that he's throwing you the ball. He's doing a great job.
Let's go through quickly defensively with the leading tacklers for Max Rascon, man. Kid's going off. He's averaging about 10 tackles a game.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, again, from knowing this kid from the past, that is absolutely not a surprise.
No.
He's extremely hard worker. I'm
Yeah.
happy that he's having the success.
He flies all over the field. Kid's nuts, man. And then you got Nick Murray, again, St. Mary's, averaging about 10 tackles a game. Kai Brazil had 17 tackles in his first game out, so that's
flying all over the place.
Pretty phenomenal. Tim Ruiz had 16 tackles in his first game out for Grigori.
Wow.
And then you had Nevin Gonzalez, strong safety down at East Union, had 15 tackles. Lane Holt, he's got 2 games under his belt. He's averaging about 8 tackles a game. And then you had Ryan Widergren, had 14 tackles for Grigori as well.
And these statistics are impressive on their own merit, but when you look down the line, a lot of these young men are playing on both sides of the ball. So to get those numbers and then also be playing offense, that says a lot about these players.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to have enough time to just go through all this stuff, but I think it's pretty neat that we're playing. I mean, it's not
right.
Our traditional season, and be able to get this in, and it's. I'll tell you personally, it's been very stressful. I mean,
Sure.
you're trying to make sure that you're positioning these kids in a way to be as successful as possible, and sometimes you feel like you're letting them down, but you just got to do the best thing you can, the best you can with what you have, and hope that it all comes out in the wash. The leading interceptions was Cannon Gibson at Mariposa. He's got 3 so far on the season through
Nice.
2 games. Andres Tamayo has 2 picks out of Downey in only 1 game, and then Kainoa Ontai has a pick for East Union. So it's neat, man. It's neat that we're getting to play.
Yeah, and East Union, big score over Ripon. I think the final score is 39-6.
Yeah,
that I got to be honest with you, that was a little bit surprising to me. But again, I guess we shouldn't be surprised by anything with football this time of the year and just the way things are going, and athletes having to make decisions on what sports they're going to play. And again, to your point that you just mentioned, if you see coaches, if you get a chance as parents or fans or whatever, and you see these coaches, make sure to thank them again, because this is extremely difficult to deal with the stuff that we're dealing with. We're all dealing with hard times for sure, but these coaches, I see what they get paid. I was a coach myself. I know what I got paid, and really they're volunteering their time is what they're doing. So, be sure to thank them, let them know that they're valuable and appreciate what they do.
Yeah. And I think the one thing that I think is a blessing for all of this through everything is that a lot of these schools have now upgraded the ability for the out of towners and their families that are out of town and fans that are out of town to watch live streaming. We're getting a lot of it through NFHS. There's a lot of YouTube Live last week. That was where our game was posted, and that's free, so it's good. It's really good.
Free is good. Free is good.
NFHS is like $10 a month, and it's not going to be the best stream. I mean, but at least you can see. I mean, it's high school football, and if you have an affinity for a player, a school, or whatever, that gives you an opportunity to at least visualize what you're reading, and for us, I ended up watching last Thursday night Central play Clovis High, because I just had an interest in it, you
Yeah.
know, and so I was able to watch the game, and a game I wouldn't have typically got to watch, you know, and so I mean, we played on Friday night, so I had missed a lot of our games, but I was able to watch a film on the Somerville Big Valley game as well. So I'm actually pretty impressed with the way things are going. You know, I know that not everybody's going to be as happy as myself, you know, but because of the way games are being played and things that are going on, but we're getting through it, and we're going to do the best thing we can. I mean, the best we can to get through this, you know, next couple of few weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. With that said, I kind of wanted to just spend a couple minutes and talk about something that I observed this last week. It's no secret that I'm a huge wrestling fan, huge college wrestling fan, huge high school wrestling fan. The national championships for the NCAA Division I were this past week, and that is always, to me, kind of like, you know, a highlight. It's you know, it's over a period of 3 days. You can find me plastered to the TV set for 3 days watching everything from preliminaries all the way through the finals. And it is always, if you like wrestling, you feel the same way. It's the best of the best, and it's really exciting to watch. But there was a couple of California related storylines that are very disappointing that were related to it. So we had Fresno State, which had multiple qualifiers that did very well. I believe there was one or two All-Americans, or at least one All-American from Fresno State. And then you had Stanford, which had multiple qualifiers. Both of those schools have announced that this year will be their final year for wrestling, and it is extremely disappointing. We need to have more programs at the college level, especially in the state of California, for wrestling, and not less. That really whittles down, you know, college wrestling in California all the way down to, I think our premier program now is going to be Cal State Bakersfield. I believe they discontinued wrestling at San Francisco State. It may still be there, but that's at the Division II level, Cal State Bakersfield being Division I. But the surprising thing is that Stanford had a wrestler at 165 pounds. He comes in as the 8th seed and knocks off the number 1 seed and works his way all the way to the finals and wins a national championship. And there's a lot of people that are up in arms about this, because here's a program that is putting a national champion on the mat, and they, behind the scenes, when they announced that they were going to drop wrestling, they received over $12 million in donations to keep the program alive, and the school still said no. And the $12 million would have perpetuated the program. They did the math. They could keep that program going for, at the very minimum, another 20 years.
Yeah.
And it could be completely funded. And, you know, on paper, that's very disappointing, but I think how that relates to high school sports, it's a direct relation to high school sports. And a lot of people will get mad at me for saying this, but in the state of California, we have a wrestling state championships. We've had it since, I want to say since like 1974, we've had a state championship in California for wrestling. Since that time, we've had one division. There's division, everybody in the state, regardless, you could go to a one-room schoolhouse with 14 students and be on the wrestling team, and you're a Division I wrestler in the state of California. To me, I think we've been shooting ourselves in the foot by doing this for an awfully long time. There's a great honor in being a state champion from California, one of only 2 schools that have a single division in the sport of wrestling. And that's great. That, you know, it's quite an honor. I mean, you've got, 20-something thousand kids that start wrestling at the beginning of the year, and then you crown only 14 of them as champions at the end. And what we've basically done is we've shown the universities that by doing this, we have pushed kids away from the sport, reduced participation to the point that the universities now feel that wrestling is just not that important in the state of California. And so I've kind of always had, promoted against one division where I've been shot down by a lot of people, but maybe it's time for the powers that be in the state of California to wake up, open it up, be like every other sport we have in the state, have multiple divisions, and increase the participation so that schools like Stanford and schools like Fresno State and schools like San Jose State back in the 80s, and all these other schools that did have wrestling, quit dropping their programs, because we're showing that it is a viable sport in the state of California. So with that said, I will step off my soapbox.
No, I think it's important. It's kind of somewhat surprising to me is that how the UFC, so MMA in general, how much of these kids, that's where they're kind of that's a feeder program now. So collegiate wrestlers are, by far and above, they're the next generation of.
Agreed. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, Jake Shields, Uriah Faber, TJ Dillashaw. I could go on. How many world champions in the UFC have come from this section right here? Yeah. Uriah Faber, Lincoln of Lincoln, TJ Dillashaw, Bret Hart High School, Jake Shields, Calaveras High School. The Diaz brothers right here, I believe they wrestled at Lincoln High School. So I mean, the list goes on, and it's like we're kind of killing ourselves.
Yeah, we have a tendency to do that, I think, in general. And I'm sure there's more that we know about why. To me, they tried to shut down the Cal baseball program a few years back, and a lot of the old baseball players and some of the alumni raised a bunch of money to keep the program going. So hopefully the powers that be will listen and understand. And I'm sure it has something to do with something that's bigger than our knowledge base at this point, but I agree. I mean, I don't think we're in a position where we should be eliminating things. We should be opening things and you're having colleges open on the daily. I mean, every single time you turn around, a new college is sprouting up, and inevitably they're starting, multiple programs. So why would an institution that is well renowned as Stanford be willing to just cut bait?
Well, Stanford, what's surprising to me is Stanford has been the recipient of the President's Cup year in and year out. And what that is, it's the NCAA school that has the most championships. There's a point system to how that works. So every championship you win in every sport, you get so many points. Yeah. If you come in second, you get so many, and so on.
Yeah.
Stanford wins that trophy almost every year.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, hey, we're going to cut 11 sports.
Yeah.
Their men's volleyball team won the national championship this year. And a couple of weeks later, they were told, pack your bags, you're not coming back. I was like, come on, guys.
It's crazy. So as we wind down, I'd be remiss to not cover this. So for all that we're going through and everything that's, exciting about getting a return to sports, there's, sometimes things happen that are sad and we can't understand it. And sometimes the powers that be or the big man in the sky has a different calling. We'd like to take this time to acknowledge the loss of Emmanuel Manny Antwi. Emmanuel was a senior up at Kennedy High School. He was, I think, they were in the fourth quarter of the game, and nothing really happened physically. Like, he didn't take a hit that they're aware of or anybody's aware of. But Manny passed out on the sidelines. They tried to resuscitate him, and it didn't work. And unfortunately, we lost Manny. I think that evening or the next day. And so we'd like to send our heartfelt condolences to his family. And kid gone too soon. If there's any solace in this, I believe that, many of the people that have spoke to the type of person Manny was he was a leader on the team comedian. Kids rallied around him. I know Kennedy's taken this week off for to allow their kids time to grieve. And I'm sure Manny will be missed, in more ways than one. And if there's something good that came out of it, I'm sure that Manny, his passion for football and his desire to play football on Friday nights, and being allowed at least that one last chance to get that in, before he was taken away from us, obviously much too soon. So, our heartfelt condolences out to Manny and his family. So, it's hard after that, Scott and I both have, gone through a lot with a bunch of, with our kids personally. So I can imagine what the Kennedy program is going through today. And so we'll leave that here today. Would be how we end our program. I believe if you guys wanted to look it up and help out the family, the mom's a single mother, is a immigrant from Nigeria, I believe. Has other kids too, and I believe there's a GoFundMe set up for Manny and his family. So the last name is spelled Antwi. Again, ANTWI. And if I'm sure you can search it through the Kennedy High School online, and you'll be able to find something for them. So we'll also try to do our best to locate that and post it, help the family out during this time. So we'll cut out now and talk to everybody next week. Hope that here's to a safe and exciting week of football.
Yep. Good luck, everybody.